So this is the second video on the DR200 build. So I've got the engine out of the bike and I'm just going to strip it down in this video. So I'll go through the process of doing that. So the first thing I had to do was just remove the exhaust header from the exhaust port. And it was a bit of a bastard because the the exhaust studs were so rusted that I had to actually like whack a easy out type nut on it, which is one of these things, and then I had to spin it out slowly, and I ended up pulling the whole stud out, which is okay because I can get new studs from work and just get a new stud in and a new nut and it'll be like brand new. And then I just had to loosen off all the hardware that holds on the valve cover, and the valve cover also acts as the cam journal. So I'll pull the valve cover off. These are the valve adjustable inspection caps, I guess you could call them. So that's where the tappets are for the nut and screw type valves it's got. And the first thing I've noticed is when I pull them off, these O-rings here are pretty much plastic. They're gone that hard. So yeah, kind of interesting. So I'll pull all these bolts out. I'll probably leave these ones here actually threaded in, because these two screws at the top here, they just retain the rocker pins, so they don't actually really do anything about holding on the valve cover. They just retain the rocker pins, so it'll be easier if I just leave them done up slightly to hold the rocker pins in place. So I'll pull all the rest of the bolts out and put them in my container, and then I'll whack the valve cover off and see what the condition of the cam journals are basically, and see if there's anything catastrophic going on in the head. And I've also noticed that there's been a repair done, which is a very commonplace for the DR200 valve covers to crack, because this is where the engine mounts to the top of the frame, and it's a bit of a stress area, and they get a crack around here and start to leak oil. So this one's actually been repaired in the past, which is quite interesting. So somebody at some stage has actually been looking after this bike before it became a crackhead bike. And I'll also take off the oil filter cover and see what the oil filter, what kind of state that's in. But I'll put a container underneath it before I pull this off, because a bit of oil is going to come out. There might not be much oil in there because I've actually drained most of the engine of oil at this stage. So I've got it cracked open and there's no oil in there, which is good. Good to know that the oil filter is actually been put in the correct way, and at first glance it's about as I would expect. A bit dirty, bit of clutch material inside it, but there's no metal filings, so that's a good start, I suppose. And just a side note, that these studs which hold on the oil filter cap, they were also quite rusted and corroded, so the studs came out with the nuts. So that's how it's supposed to come off, just the nut come off, but with these being rusted on, they actually pulled the whole stud out, which is kind of to be expected on this bike, because everything has been seized on this damn thing. So I can now take off the valve cover, which, as I explain, is also part of the cam journals, and those are nice and tidy, which is a good start. It's very good. So there's no scoring on those journals, which is awesome. It seems to be in quite tip-top condition. And also the followers for the rockers. There's a little bit of polishing on them, but they're in good condition, which is awesome. The screws for the tappets, they haven't mushroomed or anything, so it's been kept in a good valve tolerance. The same goes for the valve stem. Those aren't mushroomed, which is great. The cam itself has a little bit of polishing on it, but yeah, good condition. The only thing that's slightly shit is, you see there's a bit of play on the cam chain there, which isn't perfect, but to be fair, all I've got to do is I'll probably replace the tensioner guides for the cam chain, and also I'll replace the cam chain, because that's no biggie, they're cheap and I can get them through work, no problem. So yeah, for a beginning of the engine teardown, I'm actually very happy. So I'll pull this cam out, and then I'll go about loosening off the cylinder studs, which are these four, and then I'll drop the cam chain off the sprocket, drop it down under the tensioner, and then I can pull the whole barrel off and see how the condition is of the head and see how the condition is of the bore and the piston. So that's going to be interesting. And also a somewhat interesting note is that the clip that retains the screws for the cam sprocket, that's been pinned over, so that's not a factory pin over, it's been re-pinned over, and it's not an ideal practice because it could snap off and then you could have a piece of metal floating around your engine. But anyway, that's been pinned over by somebody, so somebody has actually been into the head of this engine and they've done something up the top end, which is interesting. I wonder what they've done. We'll find out soon. So I'll now take the cam chain tensioner out, which is this bit here. And it looks like the cam chain tensioner was a full extension as it came out, because they had very little spring preload on it when I tapped it and it was coming out. So yeah, that's showing that the cam chain's probably worn and the cam chain guide is worn and the tensioner guide is worn. Kind of to be expected when the cam chain's bobbing up and down like that. So all I've got to do now is pin these over and pull the cam out. So I just took the little cam cap off on the stator side, so I can now turn the crankshaft, and the engine's turning over nicely, and I'm just lining up the screw here so then I can pin over the other cam retaining screw. And here is the camshaft in pretty good order, really. It's a little bit of polishing on it, but no, it's in good condition. So I'm happy with that. Certainly we'll be able to reuse this sprocket. And the cam journals look like they're in fantastic condition. So that's awesome. So this thing's always had a good amount of oil in it, which is great. So now I've just got to remove the stud nuts, which is these four. And then there's a couple screws down here, well, nuts down here, which you can't forget about. And now I can pull the barrel off. Well, to be more correct, there's also some screws down here, and then I can split the head from the barrel. So I'll undo these screws and undo these screws, and I'll remove the head, and then I will remove the barrel afterwards and have a look at the condition of those. So it'll be interesting to see what condition the barrel is going to be. And just judging by the condition of these threads, I'll give it a little spray of some penetrating oil, just to give it its best shot of getting out, because they're pretty rusty and everything on this bike's been seized so far, so these are bound to be a little bit troublesome as well. Can't forget to take this little screw out too, which holds in tensioner guide, which is showing some signs of wear there, which is expected. We knew we were coming into this. And this is the bolt which holds it in. So everything's loose now, and theoretically I should just better rip the head off, so I'll give it a whack with a soft hammer and see if it comes off. So there's a head gasket and a couple dowels which usually get a bit corroded in, so you've got to give it a little whack sometimes to free it up, but it is coming loose. And here's our head. Quite dirty and covered in carbon. But in good condition. And there's our piston. A whole bunch of dirty shit in there. So I'll give that a clean out, and then I'll be able to inspect the barrel and the piston. I think most of that stuff that's in there, all that rusty dirt crap, I'm pretty confident that that's all just stuff which has found its way down the spark plug hole, because it's had a spark plug removed from it for I don't know how long. And any dirt and dust and rust particles could easily find their way into there. So the bore's really dry, hasn't been used in ages, so before I rip the barrel off and move the piston up and down a couple more times, I'm just going to lubricate the barrel and the rings with some 2-stroke oil. And this is a good trick I learnt from my workmate. If you're ever doing some engine work and you want to lubricate anything in the combustion side of the engine before you start it up, 2-stroke oil is a good oil to use because it's designed to combust anyway. So yeah, a good little tip is to use 2-stroke oil. And the barrel's coming off pretty easily. So an interesting feature of the DR200 is it's entirely aluminium cylinder. So the whole thing's made of aluminium, including the actual cylinder wall. However, it's got a coating on it which they call SEEM, which stands for something like Suzuki Composite Electrochemical Material, I believe. And it's basically a nickel plating, so nickel silica carbide type plating. And they put it straight onto the aluminium. And that is what you see in here, which is shiny. It's completely different to a chromed cylinder. And it's quite interesting because the whole cylinder is actually made of aluminium. There's not even a sleeve here made of any type of iron. So yeah, that's the cylinder here. And the one advantage of this type of cylinder, which Suzuki makes and calls SEEM, is the entire cylinder being made of aluminium means that there is a lot better heat transfer, as aluminium is a better conductor of heat. And this technology is derived from their race bikes, which is kind of interesting. And why have I done this on a DR200? Probably just for cost savings, I assume. I don't actually know. And the major disadvantage of the electrochemical plating, or composite electrochemical material, whatever you call it, is that once it is worn out, you're down to aluminium and you can't do anything with the cylinder. So if you got any scoring on it, which this one does have a little bit, which isn't actually horrible, but you can feel it with your fingernail. And the cylinder got a bit damaged when I was taking it off as well, because I've never seen this before, but the cylinder stud was actually seized into the cylinder on this particular one on the bottom left hand corner. It was completely corroded in, like rusted in, completely shut. So I had to beat the shit out of it with a hammer. Being a soft faced hammer, it still damaged the cylinder here, and that's not reusable. So I'm just going to have to find myself a good second hand cylinder, or even a brand new one out of Suzuki. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, this cylinder is toast. And just some interesting stuff about this cylinder here being a completely aluminium cylinder. You don't really see that on many vehicles. Now the good news, the little end bearing on the piston here is in very good condition, as well as the big end bearing, which is down on the crankshaft. So I'm not going to have to split the engine's gearbox and do any major work, but I'm still going to clean up the piston and throw a set of rings at it to match the second-hand good condition or the brand new barrel, which I'm going to buy sometime soon. So to remove these pistons, there's just a couple circlips, internal circlips here, which hold in the gudgeon pin. So you take out one of those, you can pull out the gudgeon pin, and then the cylinder will just come off. So I'll do that right now and have the piston taken off. And a good trick when you're dealing with these circlips is you stuff a rag down here, so then if it pops off and falls down into the gearbox, you're not going to have some fun times trying to fish it out with a magnet or something, because these little circlips are held under tension, and once they're a little bit loose, they do have a tendency to spring off and go flying across the workshop or down into the abyss of the engine's gearbox. So this is the little circlip which is out. I think you can also call them a gudgeon clip. It's basically just an internal circlip. And here comes the gudgeon pin. It's a bit slippery because it's coated in oil, as it should be. So I'll pull that off out of camera. Out it comes. Now that's in pretty good condition, just a little bit of a polish up and it'll be sweet to go again. And here's the piston. A very small little thing, a couple of little orifices for the oil. And it's in great condition, so I'll just be replacing the piston rings on this and giving this piston a really good cleanup. And interesting to note on this thing here, because I was thinking about skimming the head a tiny bit to see if I can get a little bit more performance out of it, just for a laugh really. And it's definitely quite a close tolerance sort of interference engine, because they have a little few cutouts on the piston here to make it non-interference, where the valves would be pushing down, one for the intake and one for the larger exhaust, or however it works. Let's have a look. So there should be a larger intake, I suppose. That makes more sense. Yeah, so a larger intake valve and then the smaller exhaust valve to match up to the head of the piston here, which goes in that orientation while it's in the engine. So on the bottom end here, I'm also going to pull off the stator cover and also the clutch cover, just for the sake of cleaning everything and inspecting the bottom end areas. So I'll pull this off, and then I'll pull the clutch cover off as well, and I'll be replacing all the gaskets and oil seals in this engine. So it's going to be basically like a brand new one with the new piston, or not the new piston, but the new cylinder, the cleaned up piston with new rings, and the cleaned up head. And I'll throw some new valve stem seals at it, and I'll also give these, I might give these valves a bit of a clean up. So yeah, there's the barrel, which is damaged, there's my head, which is in great condition, and there's my gearbox, which is in great condition as well. So overall, very happy about how this teardown's gone so far, and now I'm just going to have to pull these side covers off, just for the sake of cleaning and inspecting. So the stator cover's off and everything's in great condition. So there's the stator, which produces the AC current. There's a flywheel, which is in great condition. The idler gear for the starter assembly in good condition. There's no broken teeth off it. And then there's a one-way bearing in behind the flywheel, which is operating perfectly fine. So you can turn the flywheel by going one way, and then the opposite direction it just spins. And that's the starter clutch working. So just to show the parts that we've pulled out of the engine today, when we've torn it down, we'll start at the top here. The spark plug, and then there's the valve cover, all in great condition, so that's a good part which I can clean up and fix. Cam sprocket in good condition, the head, which is in great condition. All I've got to do is replace the valve stem seals and give it a clean up here, and then I'll reseat the valves. Here's the camshaft, which I just need to give a clean up, it's in great condition. Here's the cam chain guides, so this one here is actually in pretty good nick, so I'll probably just reuse this one, whereas this one here's got some pretty nasty wear on it, so I'll be replacing this one. Then I've got the cam chain tensioner, which I might actually replace with a manual one, just for the sake of it. Got the piston here, which is in great condition, so all I've got to do to this is give it a clean up and replace the piston rings. The gudgeon pin, which is in great condition. Then I've got the cylinder here, which is the only place, or the only piece I really need to replace, which is a big item, as it's damaged from being removed, and its cylinder wall is a little bit scored up, and there's nothing much I can do with it. Being a full alloy cylinder, the only thing I can do with it is replace it. And then I've got my stator in great condition, and my gearbox, flywheel assembly and clutch, which I don't actually know is in good condition, because I'll probably make a whole video dedicated just to the clutch on this thing. So yeah, there's the engine tear down. I'm very happy with the results, because this engine here was in a complete unknown condition. I didn't even know if it turned over. The kickstart was snapped off it, had no electric start when I bought it, and overall it's actually in pretty good order, so this thing's going to be a pretty straightforward restoration. So yeah, here's all the parts, all lined up and ready to clean up, get replaced, be refurbished and be reassembled. So I'm very happy.